So I really want to ask you, what do you remember about writing these four memoirs, these four books?
Well, that quote that you actually said is "Memory a thing you have or lost" is from a Woody Allen film called Another Woman, by the way. And that's, if
Right.
you haven't seen that film, it's a really great film with a great American actress, Jenna Rollins, and it's one of the top 3 or 4 Woody Allen films. I'll eventually get to it in my great film series. As far as the memories of writing about the memories, I decided to write the books just because I wanted to get down things. As you get older, you're what, 20, in your mid 20s maybe. Um, you'll
Yes.
you'll find as you get older, the brain has a limited storage capacity, and I needed to write this down. It was a transition from just writing essays and poetry at the time to then trying to write creative fiction. And so I wanted to write down the names of like the kids in the gang, the kids that I grew up with, because I knew that if, let's say, I tried to write these books now, I would miss things because just like, the universe supposedly is expanding and some galaxies are going to go off to, they're going faster than the speed of light. Once they get beyond the horizon, we'll never see them again, the cosmic horizon. I might not have retained some of these memories. Now, at least I know I can go back and look. Now, the names are different. Let's say if I had a pal named Bill and I call him Bob in the book, I'm not going to necessarily remember the names, but if I look at the memo, I say, oh, that's when Bill and I did this, but I say it's Bob. So it's just, it was a mnemonic device for me to remember things when I get old and senile. Um, but yeah, so that's why I wrote that, so that I would have, because even 18 years, I'm 56. When I wrote that, I was 38. I was only about 20 years removed from my high school years, which a lot of that takes place in the book. Um, and I knew that I would forget names and things that happened. So it was mnemonic and also as a bridge to writing fiction rather than just poetry.
Interesting. So one of the things I really liked about the book is that it seems like the four books is that you have these memoirs and almost, I guess, with almost every memoir you
Hope you
have
just froze up there.
poems before the memoirs.
Well, yeah, I decided
Uh,
to use the poetry because uh, they're called True Life and they have little Italian subtitles. And there's it's not La Dolce Vita. What? Let's see. True Life one here. That's La Vita Nuova. Yeah, that's right. It was La Vita Nuova was what's his name? Dante's uh, book where he did that. He mixed poetry and prose, and I thought, that's interesting because I always liked Dante's La Vita Nuova, that series of poems and prose about his life, more than I ever did the Divine Comedy, or just the comedy, technically. And so I said, well, that would be an interesting thing. So each of the books has that Italian subtitle, and I said, well, I'm going to out Dante because, quite frankly, looking at my life and from what people would tell me when I would talk with them, as I'm talking with you, I said, I led a much more interesting life than Dante in 1,000 years. Once, all of us who are alive now are ancients, and we're in the future public's consciousness. They're going to say, they're not going to see much of a difference between when Dan Schneider lived and when Walt Whitman lived and when Dante lived. They're old and dead people. So I said, let me outdo him. That way, people will say, ah. And also, one of the things I like doing in art is making connections and acknowledging things from the past. I just recently finished a novel, for example, called The Grand and the Glorious. And like with a lot of my novels, and as you read Tumbleweeds and A Norwegian in the Family, you'll see I have extensive notes where I borrow a line here or a line from a song there or something. And so I always try to give the credit, to show that art isn't just me, pulling great stuff out of my head, although there's a lot of things that I can do that no one else has done. But to improve on something, to say, oh, here, Dante 800 or 900, however many years ago, he wrote this interesting quasi-memoir, you might call it, about his life. 900 years later or something, I said, well, I can do that, and I can do it better because I've got those 900 years of literature from the West and the rest of the world, in fact, to do so. So that's why that came about.
All right, so I assume because I remember in the memoirs you said that you intentionally did not plot the books very much
Yeah,
because you wanted to be like a raw, just like from your memories as it goes. But you also have these poems you wrote. I know you've written I don't know thousands of poems, well, maybe, and so maybe you just had enough poems for literally every single story you wanted to write. But was there a moment where you're like, well, I've got a poem for this. This happens. This is a very important thing. Maybe I'll start the memoir, this whatever memoir it is, and I'll write towards the poem. Did that ever happen?
sure, sure. I mean, not always, but each of the individual memoirs, and I guess I average about 40, 45 in them, so there's probably about 170 to 180 memoirs across the four books. Um, you you don't want to, in art, ever repeat yourself, even within one work. One of the things that I've said many times to artists is one of the most important things that you can do in art is learn how to forget. And what I mean by that is don't forget the techniques. If you learn, if you're writing poetry, or you're writing memoirs, or you're even just doing journalism, remember the techniques of how to get into a character's mind, how to end a chapter or a book with a real bang, how to open a chapter, how to make good conversation between characters that's realistic and also good. But don't remember the specifics. Remember the generalities, because you don't ever want to keep going back to the same well. If let's say I was writing love sonnets to a girl, and I went through a dozen girls in a few years that I was enamored of. You don't want to have every poem begin, "Oh, her breasts are wonderful." That would get boring. So you focus on the individual specifics, but know how to write a love sonnet to a woman, or if you're gay, I guess to a guy, that that will have you know. Meaning, and will have a way to get the reader in, because you always want to keep in mind you're not just writing for yourself. That's just masturbation. You want to connect to someone, just as Dante connected to me in the writing of these memoirs.